Hey now, Rob here, Rob School of Music, and I am with one of the coolest people you're ever going to meet, Mr. Rosh Roslin. Welcome.
Thanks for having me, Rob. Really appreciate it. It's always good to hear from you, man.
Yeah, brother. I mean, we've been talking for, I guess, since 2020 here, and you're a wealth of knowledge and just doing so many cool things. So before we dig into all of those cool things, let's get into some background. How'd you get into music? First instrument? What was the thing that made you say, "I want to do this"?
Okay. So I started off in marching band. So I was a trumpet player, and my great grandfather, he was a trumpet player in the U.S. Army. So he fought in World War II, and then after he did his service, he was in the military band. So he was a trumpet player, and so I got really inspired by him. I grew up in Hawaii, and he was retired. He was retired there, and everything. I inherited his trumpet after he passed. But he was like the guy in our family. I mean, he fought in World War II for the US, all this kind of stuff. Like, he was the man. So I got a lot of inspiration from him where I was like, hey, I want to be just like him, right? He had so many incredible stories. He traveled all over the world, and that kind of thing. So he was a trumpet player, and I started, playing trumpet in the marching band. So I played all through high school. And one of the things was in high school, I grew up in the same area as like where Blink-182 is from and everything. So I think like when I was 16 or whatever, I was at a party, New Year's Eve party, and a friend of mine, he was in the local punk band, he was a good friend of mine, and his band played in the living room. And just imagine like 100 people crammed into this house, into this living room. I mean, the poor parents, the walls probably got bashed in or whatever, but first time I was ever like in a mosh pit, and they just played like punk covers, and again, at this point I was living in San Diego, and San Diego was such a fruitful music scene for punk bands. So Unwritten Laws from there, Blink-182's from there, POD's from there, and we're only a stone's throw away from Orange County, where like No Doubt is from, and a million different punk bands, and then just even further, LA. So after that party, I got really inspired. I mean, literally, I pulled him aside. I was like, "Dude, show me what you were doing," and he showed me my first like A chord, and I was like, and it was like the worst sounding A chord, and that was it. I was totally hooked. I was like, trumpet, it's trumpet. I'm going to play guitar in a punk band. That was kind of it for me. And so, my parents had like a little beat up acoustic guitar in the garage. The action was like this high, I played that thing to death. And the thing was, I was 16. It was great. I was working a summer job at Round Table Pizza, and I went and saved up all my money, bought my first guitar, started a band with my best friend, who's still a musician to this day. He lives over in Connecticut now. But he does a lot of music composition for, different like video games and stuff like that. But, we just started this band in the garage, and, my parents were very supportive. They're like, hey, we like the fact that you're in the garage making a bunch of noise rather than running around causing trouble. And we wrote, all we did was like write songs. A local friend was like a producer. He had a studio in his garage, so we'd go over and record. And again, San Diego, I didn't know, like my high school, we had Adam Lambert, was graduated from my high school. We had an incredible music program. It was kind of like a music and arts high school again, I just grew up in this area, it was just like the high school 5-minute walk away. In the suburbs, everybody was in a band. Our high school had a stage in the quad. We could play there every Friday. Any band, if you're in a band, all you had to do was give a recording and a copy of the lyrics, because you can't have bad words, you can't do you can't have swearing, anything like that. And the principal of the school was like, hey, we want to support this. So every Friday you could set up your equipment in the quad and play. And it was amazing. It was like, I still like look fondly on those memories where I was just like, wow, and again, 16, 17, we played like by the time I was a senior in high school, we played all the senior events, senior pancake breakfast, senior this, and it just kind of was like this thing that I just absolutely fell in love with. Just being in a band with my friends and just playing music, never had any aspirations. I didn't think we were going to get signed to a record deal or anything like that. It was just something that, like, San Diego is a really great supportive music scene. There were so many all ages venues nearby you could play with your band. I mean, we were playing gigs, like couple times a month,
Wow.
and again, like, my mom had to, like, I was like, Mom, you got to drop me off around the corner because, like, I could be cool. I'm like in a punk band. I got my mohawk. I'm like so cool. Like, it's not going to be cool like if Mom's dropping me off in front of the venue and stuff. But I got to see all these bands. Blink 182 was still playing nearby. I mean, imagine seeing Blink 182 in a record store with 50 people. Like,
It's
that
amazing.
was incredible. This is like pre-Travis Blink 182.
Mhm.
So they were just like this local band. I think Dude Ranch just came out. They had a little bit of airplay on MTV, but they were just playing any gig anywhere. Aquabats was playing, and Travis used to be in that
Yeah.
band, and, like, so again, all ages venues. I got to see so much great music. $10, we'd all pile into the car. 8 of us in a car, shh, don't tell anybody, but, just getting down to the punk bit, and again, it was just like a DIY punk scene,
Yeah.
and then we would go to Orange County in LA to see bands and stuff. And again, beautiful time in my life that I still look back fondly on, for sure.
I love that, dude. It's so interesting, some of the parallels of the genesis of musical path, my musical path. It's weird you said unwritten law. Rob fact that I've always messed up, and you just corrected something in my mind. I always tell people my first show I ever saw was No Doubt. They played at our local community college on the
Mm.
Tragic Kingdom tour, but the first band on the bill was Unwritten Law. Therefore, Unwritten Law was the first band I ever saw live. So that's
Amazing.
you just changed my whole narrative. It's different. That person. But
Yeah.
like, yeah, the starting off and in the van and the parents, I remember doing gigs where like the bass player wasn't 18, so it was like a bar, but he had to wait outside until, or big X's on the hand, stuff like that, or lying to pretend someone was 20, or
Oh,
all
man.
kinds of crazy stuff, dude. So
Yeah, I got a
yeah,
story about that because,
go.
in San Diego, again, yeah, I was 18. My trumpet teacher, he was in the working top 40 bands, around town. So he would be playing in these horn bands, Earth, Wind and Fire, all these, like, huge horn bands, and he was a jazz guy and all this. And he basically one day was like, out of the blue, he's like, dude, our guitar player got sick, or he got food poisoning or something. I know you play guitar. You're in that punk band that always plays in the quad, and it's really annoying. But do you think you want to fill in for this band? And I was like, dude, I don't know any of these songs. Like, all I know is, like, I know, Dude Ranch back to, cover to cover. I know Dookie cover to cover. I know, the Black Album by, Metallica cover to cover, but I don't know. I've never learned an Earth, Wind and Fire song or any of these other things. He's like, you'll be fine. It'll be all good. Just show up. And and I looked like I was like 18 or something. And they were like, he's too young to play in here. You can't do this. And he's like, and they kind of like talk to the guy, and they're like, look, what if he stays outside? And they're like, fine. As long as he doesn't step foot in the venue, then we're going to be fine. We're going to keep our, like, liquor license or whatever.
Uh-huh.
And at the time, again, I was in a punk band. We're running around. I have my guitar dropped low. I had a wireless system. So it was like something I probably worked like a whole summer to, like, just pay for this, like, wireless system. So they put my amp on stage, set up the wireless system, and then I had to stand outside the
Oh
stage
my
door
god.
and play the gig. It was incredible. So the drummer, instead of counting off with, like, sticks, he would hit the snare 4 times, and then I would just kind of,
Wow.
like, put my ear up against the door and kind of, like, play along. It probably sounded awful, but at least, like, the band had a guitar player, um, for the
Show must go
gig or
on.
whatever. Yeah, show must go on. Anyways, I digress. So
No, I mean, dude, I love that. I mean, I think those kind of stories are what shape us, and I think every musician who's done it long enough has a handful of those that always just like fuel us. And when it's like, oh my god, I did that.
oh,
Um,
totally.
Starting from that point, I mean, let's go into the currently where you are in your life. Like, you're a full-time musician guy out in LA, not just surviving but thriving, doing multiple different things. At what point From that punk rock roots, did you start to see the future in, okay, how can I make this work?
Yeah, I moved to LA totally on a whim. Um, I think we talked about this in a previous thing, but just for
Mhm.
people who are just on this, I'll give the cliff notes. So when I was 19, I had a really bad near-death experience. So I was flying back from New York, and I ended up getting what's called a splenic infarction. So if you have an infarction in your heart, that's a pulmonary embolism. If you have it in your brain, it's a stroke. I had it in my spleen, and it was mainly due to sickle cell anemia. You can Google it or Wikipedia that. But so I ended up staying in the hospital for about a month, and I was recovering in Phoenix of all things because that's where the connecting flight was supposed to be. So I got back, and I was going to like regular standard college, psychology degree, totally that thing, very standard path. Asian parents, they're like, hey, you got to go to college, you're going to get a regular job. And in my mind, it was never in a million years did I think like I'm going to go pursue a career in music. It was definitely like I'm going to go to college, I'm going to totally do the straight and narrow path. Maybe I'll play in a band on the weekends. I was just kind of playing around in local bands, but making a little bit of money here and there, or writing music with friends, but no aspirations to do anything. And of course, with a near-death experience like that, you realize that you're not going to live forever, and time is short, time is precious. I spent most of my days just kind of just doing whatever, and that for me lit a complete fire under me, where I was like, oh, I got to like do what's in my heart. So I ended up just moving to LA. I took my mom out for sushi, and I was like, look, um, I need to go do this. I almost died. I need to make sure that, if I'm ever on my deathbed again, getting a little choked up here, that I need to pursue something that is something that I want out of my life. So she was like, go do it. Just go do it. School will be there. We'll be there. We'll support you. If anything happens, the worst case scenario is you move back home to San Diego. I was like, it's a 2-hour drive, not a big deal. So went to LA, lived with like 5, 6 other roommates, wheeled my Marshall half stack into the apartment, shared a room. It was like 6 of us in like a 3-bedroom apartment. One guy was like living in the living room and all this kind of stuff. And I just I had like 2 jobs. I was like running around town, not sleeping, working at Starbucks, drinking like tons and tons of coffee, sleeping 3 hours a night. I worked a courier job. I worked at Starbucks. I was like worked catering at the Forum, like any job that I could be at least partially have my foot in the door in the music industry somewhere. I was going to do. And again, it was just kind of one of those things where if you have the passion to do it, and being that young is a great age because your costs are low. You're I was you could sleep on a mattress, you could eat ramen every day. Like I would I never paid for food because I'd always take the leftover food back home from Starbucks, and that was like literally what I lived on. I lived on bagels and like old sandwiches and cookies and cupcakes and muffins and stuff. And that you just do it. And I was trying in vain to like find a band because I only came from like being in a band kind of background. I didn't have any type of, you know, background like that. And just like anything else, you meet people. I went to every jam session. I shook hands. I went to Guitar Center, called every number on the little, people would post,
Uh-huh.
whatever the thing is. Went on Craigslist. You need a guitar player, I'm there. And I mean, I was playing for nothing. I was, and a lot of my friends have stories like this. Like there's a, guy named Neil Daniels, great drummer. He is now the drummer for Matchbox 20. And he talks about like he didn't even have a car. He didn't even have a drum set when he moved. He rented a car and borrowed a drum kit from his friend to go do a gig. So he's already losing money, and the gig was for free. Like this is the kind of, everybody has like an origin story like this. I mean, we all do. And I think this is like the paying dues part of your career. And again, I'm not saying do something completely horrible. Don't max out your credit card. Don't go into, some debt. Don't go bankrupt trying to do this. But when you have, when you have no costs, and when you have nobody to answer to but yourself, and you don't have to take care of anybody. You're not, you don't have any, you don't have any kids, you don't have any, whatever. You can afford to take the risks to do
Right.
that. Take the tour that's going to pay you nothing, because maybe you might meet somebody along the way. Maybe the tour manager on the gig, is going to be the next guy. There are so many stories like that. I ended up, I played on an Andy Grammer record, and Andy Grammer's huge now.
Right.
And at the time, he was this guy who got a demo deal because he was busking on Santa Monica Boulevard, or in Santa Monica. And so the producer called me up and was like, "Hey, we got this guy. He's like a busker, but the songs are really good. Do you want to play guitar on this?" And I was like, "Sure." And he's like, "Yeah." I was like, "Fine." It's just these things. Again, another, I got into a band, the ND of the band, total Craigslist ad, was like, "Hey, this band," listed a bunch of influences. And I was like, "Great." Went down, jammed with him. And the drummer and MD of the band now does music for Fox Sports. And he hires me as his main session guy. I've gotten to play on commercials for the Dodgers for that. I've gotten
Wow.
to play on all kinds of Fox Sports stuff. Did I know at the time that I was rehearsing in a band for some guy, no, you just become friends. He really liked my sound. He really loved my use of effects and delay pedals and all this stuff. And he's like, "Yeah, man, I could totally use you." And then 10 years down the road, he becomes like the main musical, guy for Fox Sports. So this is the kind of thing that you're laying the groundwork, you're laying the seeds for the people that will call you in the future. I mean, if sometimes, like, I'll be hanging out with friends and I'm like, "Dude, how did we meet?" I can't even remember. And they go, "Oh my God, bro, we were on that really terrible wedding gig. And, remember that gig?" And I was like, "Oh my God, that's right." Like, a good friend of mine, he's the drummer for Berlin. He played for Engelbert Humperdinck. We met on a wedding gig. And he's like, "Remember that gig?" And I was like, "Yeah." The band leader kept turning around and saying we were playing too slow. And so every song was like 20 BPM faster than the record. And I was like, "This is uncomfortably fast to play, like a dance song." We're playing, whatever, play that funky music. And it's like, dun, 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 dun. And I was like, "This can't be the right tempo. This is no way in the right tempo." Everybody has a story. And again, you meet this random drummer on a gig, and then, I mean, he's playing the Hollywood Bowl. Like, you just never know. So this is the kind of stuff that I always tell musician, people who are coming up. Man, if you literally don't have somewhere to be, you should be going out meeting people. You got to be in the scene of wherever you are, and it's okay if you're not in LA, not New York, Nashville, whatever. Whatever your local scene is, there are musicians. You got to shake hands with them. You got to play with them. You will find your tribe of people that allow you to become, the next person that you're going to be, and again, everybody asks me all the time, like, "How did you start working with, like, Steve Vai, for example?" And I was like, "Dude, I met Thomas Nordegg at a restaurant." Like, that's the thing. There's this great restaurant. It's got really good food. It's really super healthy. And I just saw him in the corner, having lunch with a friend of his. And I just kind of walked up to him and I was like, "Hey, sorry to bother you. Big fan. You're Thomas Nordegg, right?" And he's like, "Yeah." And I was like, "Just big fan. I love what you do. You're teching for one of my favorite guitar players, blah, 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 blah." We met, exchanged numbers. That was it. Year later, he calls me. I can't do his accent, but he's like, "Rosh, you need to come down to the studio. I need your help. We need to program this Fractal." And I was like, "Where and when?" He's like, "Right now. I'll send you the address." And I was like, "Great." And I drove over to Steve Vai's studio, and I've been working with him for probably a decade now. So the thing is, it's like, you just never know. Now, you're never going to meet that person if you're just staying at home, recording, cover songs and uploading them to Instagram or whatever. Like, you got to strike that balance. And I'm lucky that I came from, I'm going to sound kind of old manish, but it's kind of like, we just didn't have that. We had MySpace, we had some social media networks, like YouTube was obviously around, but it wasn't like a thing yet. And so I was like, I don't know, I just got to meet people. I was very lucky that, I moved to the Sunset Strip. So I could just walk to all the clubs. I was walking to the Whiskey, I was walking to the Rainbow, I was walking to the Roxy, the Viper Room, and I got to meet all the door guys, the bartenders, everybody. And I would just go to those clubs every night when I wasn't playing a gig or rehearsal. Walk in, see whatever band it is. And everybody in LA is just trying to like do great things with their careers. So I would see some band, you know, it'd be like this terrible band, terrible band, terrible band, and then an amazing band playing for like 3 people. And I
Yeah.
was like, oh my God. And I go up to them, I was like, hey, I'm a huge fan of your band. I didn't catch the name. What is it? And then I'd add them on, you know, MySpace or whatever, Facebook. And I'd just be like, I was just like a fan of the band and a fan of the people. And then again, those people somehow maybe you strike a friendship. They become, uh, you know, uh, people that you work with in the
Yeah.
future. You just never know. And again, you're just laying down the foundation of that. And you're never, I would say, you're not like networking because I really hate that term. It's more that if you really are passionate, if you really genuinely love something when you see, you know, a great musician or a great band, like just be a fan of them. Go see their show. You never know who's going to show up. You might be standing next to some guy or gal who's going to be the next person that you work with. You just never
Yeah.
know. Yeah.
I love every single part of that. I think, and that's something I like instruct into my students is be out there, be on the scene, be cool, be friendly, be humble,
Mm-hmm.
be engaging, be sincere. All of these things. I had a situation personally, maybe 6 weeks ago. I was at Guitar Center in Paramus, New Jersey, and there was a guy walking around, tall guy, loose clothing, beanie sort of hat, slinked back. And I was like, man, this guy looks familiar. So I pull it up on my phone, who I think it is. I'm like, nah, it doesn't make any sense. That's impossible. Why here? Why now? I'm in Paramus, New Jersey. And he gets closer to me on the checkout line. And I was like, fuck it. I pull it up on my phone. I'm like, I'm sorry. This is super strange. You look a hell of a lot like this guy. And he's like, oh, guilty. And it was Josh Crawford, Chili Peppers. And he was the nicest, coolest, most down to earth guy. We talked. I told him I'm recently engaged. He gave me a comp ticket to the Pearl show in a couple of weeks. Like we've been emailing, just the sweetest man. And like after he checks out, like I'm like to the guy behind the counter, I'm like, dude, this guy, do you know who that was? Like, and he's like, I don't know, bro. I'm like, all right, Guitar Center guy, whatever. But like just that, you know, just by
Mm-hmm.
friendly, you know, it's amazing. Um,
Yeah.
I think another thing that you excel incredibly well at is you have tremendous authority in specific things with the music world, Fractal, for example, Axe Effect stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So, can you go into like how you've established that authority? You know, being the person that people see your videos and in the chat rooms and things like that. Because I imagine that's Steve Vai and Def Leppard and all these other things. Like, yeah,
Right. All right. So I'm gonna name drop for like 2 seconds and then
do
hold
it,
for
do
applause
it.
just to be that guy. But yes, so like for those of you watching, yes, I've worked with Steve Vai, Melissa Etheridge, Def Leppard, Maroon 5, Perfect Circle, Bush, a ton of great musicians and acts that I'm in. Why me? I have no idea. Still, I'm like pinching myself. I was like, God, Steve, I saw you when I was like watching Crossroads, the movie, and I was like, that's incredible. I want to be like the devil's guitar player, you know. Screw Ralph Macchio, like Steve, I just like totally crushed that, like you know. So, and I mean, he did, you know, one of my favorite soundtracks, the Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure soundtrack, the second movie. Never in a million years did I think I'd ever work with him. So you know, one of the things with the modeler world, right? Because you know, I came from like the amp and pedal world, like all of us, right? So I had amps, I had pedals, I had like you know a bunch of different amps, a bunch of different pedals. When you first start touring, or when you first start playing, you know, with some of these pop acts, you end up having to run direct. So, you know, at the time, oh, God, I don't know, 15 years ago or whatever it was, you know, all the direct guitar rigs were just terrible. They sounded awful. I was coming from like an amp world where like my amp rig sounded awesome. That I still have. It's amazing, you know. But of course, you have to start running direct. You have to start running on in-ears, you know. So for any of you guys who are going to be going into the touring world in terms of like high-level acts, pop, rock, anything like that, you're going to end up having to either go with an in-ear rig or go direct at some point. So most guitar players, I think, need to have both types of rigs: a direct rig, as well as like a regular traditional rig. And then, you know, the size of the rig is going to be something that you can fly with if you travel. And the modelers nowadays are so good. Everybody asks me, which one's the best one? I was like, dude, honestly, whatever you can afford. I mean, even the $500 version of an HX Stomp or something is really good, way better than anything I was using when I first started touring.
Right.
So when I got an Axe Ultra from the guitar player from Seosin. So he, that band, he later became the guitar player for the Used, but he was in Seosin at the time. And the thing was, they're in Orange County, kind of based Huntington Beach, I think, based kind of band. So we'd been friendly, being in the music scene together. And then I basically was just kind of complaining, like, dude, this direct rig they're making me play sounds awful. I need something better. And he's like, oh, I just got this thing called an Axe. And so he loaned me one. And I said, well, you're never going to get this back. I will give you the money, whatever you paid for it or whatever you want for it. I'll totally buy it off you. And he sold it to me. And I just went super deep into it because, again, I was coming up with sounds that, I needed to come up for like a tour where it was so many disparate sounds for like a pop tour. So if you listen to pop music even now, like if you take a whole album, let's take, I don't know, like Sabrina Carpenter or something, like the guitar sounds are all over the place on that record, or if you're, touring behind Chapel Roan or something, right? So a lot of pop stuff is going to be like that, where you used to have to use like this whole, motherboard pedal board kind of thing to do that. Now you don't need to, you can do it all in a modeler, whether you have the Helix or the, Kemper or Fractal or whatever. So, I was one of the first people in town to, start using this in the touring world. So people were always asking me, hey, what's that? And I was like, oh, it's an Axe Effect. And so as Fractal started getting more high profile clients, started more of their, famous adopters, my name just kind of got associated in town where they're like, hey, we got this guy, he knows that unit inside and out. And so my name started getting passed around in circles. They're like, hey, this guy can come in. And again, this is, I wasn't like a guitar tech. It was just like, I had learned it for my needs. And then I was able to like quickly do that for other people and integrate it with MIDI, integrate it with pedals and all this kind of stuff. So that's just kind of how it came about. And again, what we were just talking about before, you never know who's going to give you the phone call. My first, let's say, big name client, because again, I've been working with like the rock and pop world, the metal world, a lot of bands that were like on Ozfest. I was using a lot of Fractal stuff for them because a lot of the metal bands were the first adopters of the Fractal stuff, right? So I was working with a band called Suicide Silence, and if I said, hey, this band Suicide Silence, man, they're like, playing Ozfest to like 10,000 people, and everybody was like, who? And if you were outside of that world, it was like whatever. But the one that kind of put me on the map was Def Leppard, and that was like the first, like, let's say, band that my mom knew, And I called her up. I was like, oh my god, I just got the call for Def Leppard. They want me to go in and like help them prep for a tour, and they got a bunch of Fractals, and we're going to transition them from like their huge refrigerator racks into just like a Fractal. And I was incredibly nervous, obviously, and I'm a huge fan of Def Leppard. I mean, who isn't? And they were the nicest people. And again, it was just through recommendation. And most of the people who have contacted me, at least leading up to the pandemic, has always been through a referral. At the time, I never posted anything on YouTube. My YouTube channel had like, 3 followers, and I'd post like some video of like some gig. And I never did any of that. But the thing was, during the pandemic, we all found ourselves with a lot of extra time. So people had been begging me for a long time, like, hey, you should start posting some videos of Fractal and like tutorials and guitar lessons and all kinds of stuff on YouTube. People really want to do this. And I was like, sure, I got extra time now. We're all sitting at home, and thankfully I was teaching remotely, teaching guitar lessons. I was, doing a lot of studio work remotely. So I just started putting content up on YouTube. And honestly, it was just something that I just wanted to give back to users, because a lot of people, I always started running into the same questions, no matter who the client was, whether they were famous or not famous. It was always like, hey, how do I do this? How do I do that? And I was like, you know what? I should just have a YouTube video rather than like jumping on the phone and explaining how to do it. I was like, hey, I already put this YouTube video up. And that was totally the idea. It was like, if you find yourself like, if you're a drum teacher and you're like, hey, I'm going to teach a paradiddle, right, left, right, left, right, left, left. Like, you can just make a video of that lesson so that you can always give it to your students later. Like, hey, remember that paradiddle thing that we did in the lesson? just watch this video if you ever need to review it. And that was totally my concept, where I was like, hey, these are things that everybody asks me all the time. And instead of, I could just send them a link to a YouTube video. It was honestly like a total depository of just information of stuff that I thought was going to be useful for people who contact me directly. And I never in a million years thought like people would start watching the videos online and contacting me directly. And I started getting phone calls and emails from people like, "Hey, I found this YouTube video of you. Can you program my Fractal remotely?" And again, everybody was at home during the pandemic, and I was like, "Huh, I wonder if I could." And so I just kind of fell into it and started figuring out like, how do I get a Zoom call to work? How do I do all this? How do I screen share? And I was coming up with different ways to work with people remotely to program all their modelers and stuff. So, and here's a thing that can be really useful for any musician doing this, whether you're just starting out or if you are already well established in your career. Here's one thing. For example, I work with Papa Roach, and here's how they found me. They found my YouTube video. They emailed me directly on Instagram. Well, DM me. That's it. And they were like, "Hey, we found this YouTube video. You live in LA, right?" "Yes." And I was like, "Great. Can you come down to the studio?" And I was like, "Awesome." And it was Tobin from bass player for Papa Roach, literally DM me. And here's the thing: one thing that you have to keep in mind, everybody, is that there's no better service that other people have access to. Meaning, YouTube doesn't matter who you are. Steve Vai is going to look on YouTube. Papa Roach obviously looked on YouTube. Like the person in the cover band, 10 towns over, 3 states over is on YouTube. There's not like some other platform that these people are on. Everybody's on Instagram, everybody's on YouTube, everybody's on Google. So you may get an opportunity to work with a named client or a named person if you have stuff on the internet that you can show your expertise. You can show what your personality is like, and people may end up reaching out to you. You just never know. And the idea for me always was like, I'm just trying to give back to a community. I'm trying to be of value and of service, because as a musician, that's all you have to offer. You are just trying to be of value to the tour, to the artist, and even when I teach guitar lessons, I'm just trying to be value to the student. I'm not trying to show the student the distance between where they are and where I'm at. I'm just like, if they talk to me and they're like, "Yeah, hey, I had a student yesterday talking about, it's like, oh man, my alternate picking, I need to get that a little faster. I always feel like I'm doing this." And I was like, "Oh man, I'm still working on my alternate picking, dude." And he's like, "What?" And I was like, "Yeah, because like I took a lesson with Paul Gilbert, and like he is like where I want my alternate picking to be, and my alternate picking is like way." So the distance that you think you're seeing between yourself and myself is like the distance I see between, and I'm watching guys, play in person, like up close, and just watching, I did Dweezil Zappa's, rig pretty recently. Yeah. And I mean, he's got this incredible hybrid picking, economy picking thing. And I was just like, "Oh, that is incredible." I need to get my like alternate picking chops together. And again, or hybrid economy thing.
Right.
You just never know. So the thing is, I'm trying to be of value to the student, where I'm just like, okay, here's what I worked on to get here. Here's what I did. Here's my approach. Here's some things that I found inspiration in that maybe could be useful and helpful for you. So I showed him some sarod players, that Indian instrument. I was like, this is kind of how I adapted my alternate picking. And again, never like from an ego thing, like, "Hey, look how much better at guitar I am than you are." Right. It's more like, I'm like, "Dude, this is what helped me. I studied," or I'll be like, "Hey, I studied with this guy, and here's what his insights are," or "Here's some insights I've gleaned from working with, so and so," that kind of thing. It's all about being of value, about being of service, giving more than you take, and I think you will find that you will be like rewarded handsomely for it.
Totally, man. So much to unpack there. Serving the song, I think, is a huge part of, you said you have to be value to the artist, to the gig, to the tour, whatever it is. I was working with a young bass player just this past week, and we're doing For Whom the Bell Tolls. killer bass intro, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, I need the wah pedal, I need the drive pedal. I'm like, do you know the rest of the song yet? And he didn't. And I was like, dude, you got to serve the song. Your intro, your showboating, that's amazing, but what about the rest? And like, he was a kid, 11-year-old kid, so it was difficult for him
Sure.
to fully grasp that. But once he did, I felt like that was like a valuable musical life lesson,
Mm-hmm.
in that
Yeah.
moment, and also showing the humility as a teacher. In my instruction, I'm the first to say, um, when teaching something, I'm not the very best at this, but here's where I'm at, and let's get you to where I am. And then if we need to go further, we can point you in the proper direction.
Right. I think, yeah, especially in the teaching thing, I love giving, lessons and being a music educator. I think it's one of those things where I think there's a misconception about it where people go, "Oh, if you can't do teach." And I'm like, "No, man, like music educators have impacted my life way more than playing the forum, way like like I've gotten to play for 10,000 people or whatever, and like I still think of all the lessons that take. I still take lessons currently. I've been studying with Dave Elich, for example, on drums, um, and the whole point of it is that I feel like you're just passing the baton,
Mhm.
right? It's been a
Yeah.
it's been a relay race from the first guy who strung a guitar together and hit it with a pick. Like it's just been a relay race. So all my favorite music educators are like, "Hey, I'm just passing the fire to the next guy and to the next guy and to the next guy." And I always feel like that too, because it's like when I'm old and on my deathbed, I want to be like, "Oh man, like that student of mine or that student's student is now making this incredible music, and somehow we all were part of this lineage with it."
Yes.
And
Yes. It's an honor, really.
it is. And I think, most people don't realize this, but I think like even the greatest guitar players on earth that's all they're doing. They're taking somebody's knowledge and then they're putting it through their blender of whatever,
Mhm.
and then they're passing it down. So like, for example, Dweezil Zappa talks very fondly of taking lessons with Eddie Van Halen, which is like, what? He talks about it on his podcast, but when he was young, Eddie Van Halen used to come to his house, to hang out with Frank Zappa, and Dweezil would just bug him for guitar lessons. And I was like, hey, what better teacher to study with than Eddie Van Halen?
Yeah.
So, and then Dweezil is so open about that kind of thing, where he's just like, hey, man, this is like how Eddie did it. I do it like this. There's a really incredible interview that he does with Rick Beato that's on
Mhm.
YouTube, anybody watching. And he totally talks about that. And again, I've gotten to talk to Dweezil directly about it. I was like, dude, so when you were with Van Halen, da, 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 and he's like, and in my mind, I was like, I gotta like make sure we also accomplish what we're here to do, but I gotta ask, a couple
Right.
things. So I feel like that's all I'm doing. I've gotten to study with some really incredible players. I've gotten to work with a lot of incredible players up close. And whenever a student asks me about something, I'm just like, hey, this is what I got from these guys. Here you go. You mix it up with your set of influences and then go there. And I learn so much from my students because like I'm very much a person who's inspired by getting better at your craft. So if a student doesn't understand something as I explain it, then I'm like, it's not their job to understand it. It's my job to teach it better. It's my job to explain it
Yes.
better. Think of a different method, a different approach, because maybe the way I alternate pick, I have a student who's double jointed. So I'm not, but his thumb kind of goes backwards a little bit.
Mhm.
And he's like, I really want to get better with my alternate picking. And I was like, oh man, you can't do it the same way I do it because the way you hold the pick is going to be really uncomfortable. And then I went on YouTube and found as many double jointed alternate picker guys who are incredible, Tosin Abasi being one. And I was like, check out the way he does it.
Yeah.
Check out the way George Benson picks because he's doing this kind of thing. And then I'm like, and I was like teaching, and I still teach him. And I'm like, let's see if I can adapt my alternate picking to this technique and see if you can do it. And it unlocks so many doors for the student because he was so used to like the standard way of alternate picking, Mel Bay style. And I was like, that's not going to work for you. You got to
Yeah.
find the guys who've accomplished this. And now he was like, I've never even knew this guy was named George Benson. And now
Yeah.
he's totally into that kind of style of picking. And again, it unlocks a door for me. I think that brings me deep joy of like
Yes.
watching a student like push through some physical, emotional, mental barrier just because you maybe take a different approach than what you're used to. It's never like this is the right way. It's more like, That is a good question. How many different ways can we tackle this obstacle?
Yeah.
And I show them my workarounds. Like before I could alternate pick really fast, I was totally like a legato hybrid guy. To play. So I couldn't sweep pick, but I wanted to play really fast arpeggios like Ingve. So I was like, oh, what if I like skip strings and use hybrid picking to get
Uh-huh.
the sweeps down? And that's been my workaround, and now it's been a part of my playing style forever. So
That stuff, man. I feel like a lot of people in the education space, unfortunately, it's their way or it's wrong. And I feel like that is very ignorant outlook. I think music is full of hundreds, if not thousands, of strong suggestions, but very few absolutes. And I think taking the time as an educator to learn why someone, learn
beautiful
them.
way to put it, man.
Yeah, it's true. It's absolutely. It showed me a lot because I first started playing guitar when I was 5, and my teacher, I wanted to learn how to play "We Didn't Start the Fire" by Billy Joel, which, as we
Yeah.
know, is a piano-driven song, not a guitar-driven song. But in 1980 something or other, it was the song I liked, and he laughed at me and said, "It can't be done. There's no guitar." And like, you asshole, like you could have just shown me the melody on a single string, and I would have felt like playing the song. Like it's right there.
Hmm.
And he wouldn't do it. And like, I don't know, like as my life evolved into where I am now, like that was just always at the tip of my mind that like the answer is never no. It's, oh, why? Let's figure it out. Let's look from over here or over here. Yeah. So
Hmm.
very cool.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. I love the way you put it. Of a million strong suggestions, but no absolutes.
Yeah.
I'm gonna steal that. Sorry, bro.
Please do. Please do.
Um,
Yeah, dude, get it out there. It's I mentioned it. It's in my book, which I reference your story about
right.
the explosion in your body there as well. So yeah,
Yeah. I love that stuff, man.
yeah, dude. I guess let's close it out with this. So you have done many amazing things and worked with many amazing people, and I've seen you post. Um, I'll link all your stuff and all this because I just think you put out some really, really intelligent stuff and motivational stuff. And I'm going to paraphrase it very poorly, but you have this thing where you speak about, it could be Coachella one day and then it's, a bar the next day and so on. How do you maintain positivity, humility, and just overall awesomeness as you zigzag around these different sort of things? Like someone going into music, what would be your advice to them knowing the immenseness of the highs and the lows and the ups and the downs and just going through with a smile?
Right. And let me be absolutely clear. I think it's not that I'm always deeply inspired and deeply like happy and everything like that. I think it's really important to, well, I'll just say that out loud. I mean, like for example, there's this, Mateus Asado is an incredible guitar player. I really love what he did this interview where he with Corey Wong, who's another incredible
Mm-hmm.
guitar player, and he talked about why he deleted his social media for about a year and a half. And he was very, very open with it. He was like, I was having a lot of mental health struggles. I had a death in the family, blah 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 blah, and I just needed to take a step back and just reset. So let me be clear. Like for me, a music career, and I think everybody listening, a music career does have all these ups and downs. And the idea is that you are still you, whether you're sitting on the couch or you're playing headlining Coachella, whether you are headlining the Forum playing for 10,000 people, or you're in a bar playing for 3 people, whether you're giving a guitar lesson, whether you're just writing a song, whether you are, living and facing life's both joyous occasions and life's huge disappointments. I think one of the things is to try to not internalize everything, because I'll be the first to admit, I don't think sometimes, we all get into this comparison thing. I'm sitting at home, maybe a friend of mine is headlining, Wembley Stadium or whatever, and I'm like, oh man, it would be so cool to be on that gig. And you have to kind of have like set an expectation for yourself that you are still you're still a musician, you are still an artist, you are still doing your thing, because it could be that that person headlining wherever is also, when they get back home from tour, maybe they're not doing anything and then they're waiting for the phone to ring and they're just as stressed out as anybody else. And
Right.
I write a lot of this stuff to try to encourage people to not fall into this trap where they're just like, oh my God, like, no, nobody's ever going to call me again. I'll be the first to admit, like, I get a little insecure sometimes about those kinds of things, where sometimes I'm like, ooh, like, work's a little light coming up to this. Like, I'm feeling a little nervous, a little anxious about it. And I think one of the things that a lot of musicians don't do is they're not really open with that. They're either out loud with their friends, their family, their close ones, their loved ones, or even with themselves, where maybe they feel it, but they don't know what they're feeling. They're not in touch with that. And they're just like, oh, I'm feeling a little nervous and anxious, and they don't know why. And then so it can lead you down a road of being really bitter, being really anxious and angry. Why is that guy getting the call and I'm not getting the call? And then you end up just spiraling down. And then music no longer becomes like a joyous thing in your life. It becomes a source of stress, a source of, a source of anger. And the one thing that I think is really important is that you got to like protect that. I'm still 16 in my garage, just trying to get that G chord to go to the D chord. Like, G to D was like, I wanted to play, Time of Your Life by, Green Day. And I was like, I can't I got to move all three of the fingers to get to D. So I'm still working on my craft. I'm going to go to the studio later and just play drums. And I'm literally trying to get my 16th notes to be really, really solid. So I think when you are faced with a music career, and face isn't the wrong term, but when you have a music career, regardless of whatever level it is, whether it's a part-time gig, you play on weekends, maybe you work a day job, maybe you have a business and then you're doing a gig, maybe you are a full-time touring musician, but the phone isn't ringing. The idea is that you're trying to make sure that you're not going to go down the spiral of being bitter and disappointed and anxious and angry. And I think I write a lot of these things to remind myself. It's not just to be like, hey, I'm on this pedestal and I'm going to give you advice to all the plebes down there. No, it's totally for me. It is completely selfish in that way, where I'm just like, I'm feeling a little nervous. I feel a little anxious. I feel like every time I do a big gig, then the next time I'm like down on myself. And again, it's all a comparison trap. It's all in your head. Most people aren't thinking about you. They're thinking about their own stuff, right? They got families, they got lives to lead. They're not thinking about what you're doing and what you've posted on Instagram lately and all those kinds of things. I mean, I'll tell you exactly, like, I went through something like this very, very recently. So I was in Hawaii like a couple weeks ago, and doing some work out there. I could work fully remote from a laptop on the beach. And in my mind, I was like, I scroll through Instagram for like 2 seconds, and then somebody, a friend of mine's playing a big stage, and I'm thinking like, and I say out loud, I was like, oh man, like, I wonder if anybody's going to call me because they think I'm out in Hawaii or wherever. And, it's really good to have a loved one very closely. So like, my girlfriend just turned around. She's like, that people are really incredibly jealous that you're sitting on a beach in Hawaii
Yes.
right now and you're thinking about what they're doing. Like, let that go, enjoy this moment. And I have to credit having people like that in my corner, because again, when I go down on a weird spiral sometimes, like, it's good to have perspective. It's good to have people that really love and trust you and they want the best for you, regardless of whether you're playing, Wembley, or whether you're just playing the bar down the street. And she was like, dude, you're literally in Hawaii right now. Just, you gotta just like chill out and let that go. And I was like, you're right. God, what was I thinking? And again,
Yeah.
it's like those little tiny moments. If I stayed in that, then I would have been in Hawaii miserable. Like,
Right.
why would you do that to yourself? So the whole idea of having a career in music is like 90% of it is mental. Once you get your craft together, once you can play, once you got enough facility on whatever instrument you're playing, or if you're a singer, whatever you're putting out into the world, whether it's your songs, whether it's your educational content, anything is at a high enough level, then the rest of it is totally mental. You're just trying to fight day to day, going like, okay, the phone will ring, the people will call you. I just got to get to work. I got to improve my craft. I got to make sure that, these things are going to be in order. And then it's just not losing your mind. Honestly, half of it is just staying sane. And I think that's why a lot of people have had, we all know these stories of people who have struggles with, type of substance abuse. They have struggles with depression, anxiety, whatever. And those things can maybe be a physical thing, but I feel like also there is a huge mental component to that.
Sure.
Instead of numbing yourself through any types of substances or numbing yourself with different things. You gotta like maintain that mental and emotional well-being. Whether you need to see a therapist, whether you just need to work out more, eat better, whether you just need loved ones in your family that'll keep you in check. I mean, all these systems I personally have in place because I think it's really important that like you don't spiral out of control to maintain a career in music. I've seen so many musicians just totally burn out, and it's mostly because of their own doing. It's not because the phone isn't ringing. It's not because they can't get a gig. It's they can't keep a gig because they don't have their house in order.
Yes.
And so the idea is that you've got to have as many different backup plans and fail safes and systems in place. So for me, a bunch of really, really specific things. I work out every morning. Doesn't matter how late the gig went. Doesn't matter how early I got. I got to get some physical activity, and and again, I'm not going and benching 500 pounds or whatever. It's like I just got to get the body moving because the body and the mind work together. I feel 100 times better after a workout than I do when I wake up. It's really hard, but even going for a walk, go for a run, lift something heavy, it's not only going to improve your mental well-being, it's going to improve your physical well-being, but it'll improve your musicianship because now you have a stronger association with your body. You have a stronger connection between the mind and the body. So eat right. I'm not always the best. Sometimes I want a pizza and a burger, but I try to do my best to eat as well
Tourist
as I
life.
can. Yeah, you're gonna you're gonna eat a pizza at 1 p.m. 1 a.m. after loadout. Like yes, those kinds of things. You got to have people in your life that deeply care about you. And again, musicians can be sometimes guilty of this. They have friends, but these are people that they work with. These are your colleagues
Right.
and coworkers, right? And some people may fill both. I work with a lot of musicians who I am very grateful to call like friends. Like they will call in and check on me. I saw a friend of mine, Kyle, what's up? Shout out Kyle. He called me yesterday. Hey man, I'm playing down the street from you if you want to roll through. And then I was like, yeah, man, absolutely. And then he just goes, so how are you, man? And we just chat for 10, 15 minutes. I'm grateful to call you a friend. We always check in on each other. And
Yeah, man. Absolutely.
it's never some like, trying to hustle a gig out of somebody else. It's never a networking thing. It's just like you are deeply just connected to this person and you're, invested in their well-being. You need to have people like that in your life. The other thing is, of course, having systems, financial systems in place. Don't be in debt. Keep your bills paid. Try not to spend more than you earn. Try to make sure that your taxes are paid. All this kind of stuff. If you need help, hire somebody who will help you do that. There are plenty of people out there who can help you keep your finances in order, so you're not stressed out about money. Regardless of how much or how little you make, that's always going to be a component of that. And then last but not least, honestly, like reading a lot of stoicism, a lot of philosophy will help me, because you'll realize that people and human beings have dealt with this for thousands of years. You are no different than somebody who lived 1,000 years ago. They're stressed about not being able to get up in the morning and making sure the harvest is going to let them survive through the winter.
Right.
You read Stoicism, you read Marcus Aurelius, the Emperor of Rome. He is the most powerful man in the entire free world at the time, the richest man, and he still has the same troubles as the rest of us. He's still dealing with jerks and people who want to take him down, people who talk terrible about him. He has all the stresses and the weight of the shoulder of running an empire. How is the army going to fight this? How am I going to get how am I going to collect the taxes from the citizens? And he's dealing with exactly the same thing. He's having trouble getting out of bed. He literally writes that in his journals and diaries. And so a lot of that thing will just keep that perspective of like, right, this is what it means to be a human being. It is a struggle. I'd rather lay in bed. I'd rather do nothing, but you have to get up. You have to do the thing that's going to, again, help you get to the next step and the next step and the next step, so that you don't have to, resort to, unhealthy habits, that will, take you down physically, mentally, emotionally, all that kind of stuff.
Yes. Yes, 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 absolutely, yes, man. That's amazing. I can't agree with you more that it's so much more than just the gig. It's so much more than just the paycheck. It's life. It's a lifestyle, and it's having that full and complete life. The last chapter in my book discusses the mental and physical wellness aspect of life. It connects to everything. So, dude, we're friends for a
Yeah.
reason. We're cut from the same. I love it.
Yeah, and I find like a lot of people think this stuff. Maybe they're just not as open. So
Yeah,
having a career in music is finding people that align with your values. That's all it's going to come down to. Anybody that you see on tour, they did not stand in line for an audition. They have a friend, a colleague who's part of the camp. They get the call because of that, because they want to bring like-minded people on board. If you have an artist who wants rock stars, who are complete extroverts, that's the people they're going to call. You will. And the thing is, like, one thing that I think that has been really useful is that you find your place in the world. You have to, Miles Davis talks about this. He says it takes a long time to sound like yourself, and I think it takes a long time in your career to find your place in it. And I think that is always the biggest struggle for every musician coming up. They're bombarded with all the millions of options of what you could do, and then over time you're not building your career, you're whittling it down. You're chopping away the unnecessary things, because I'm not getting called for classical guitar gigs even though I attempted it, So I've whittled down my career now at this point where it's like the things that totally inspire me day to day, totally that I'm looking forward to, totally things that don't stress me out, so that I don't have to feel anxious and nervous. Like if I show up in a musical situation that maybe I'm not suited for, I am not the guy to get, I'm not the guy to do a heavy bebop gig. It's just not in my lifestyle. It's not in my life plan. I don't listen to the music as deeply as I do other styles of music. And again, every musician I think can really, really do this, where they have to find their place in it and then double down, triple down, quadruple down. And then you find your tribe of people, your group of people, the thing that you do, the thing that you are the number one thing at, the thing that people associate your name with, the call. Hey, if you want this type of thing, these are the guys and gals to call. And then that's when you build your career. And that's when your career is like you're gonna look back and go, thank God I didn't say yes to this one thing that I was gonna be terrible at, but I said yes to this other thing, and then now I'm the guy or gal for that. And you'll have a career. I think it's just all that. The ones that maybe are a little don't, have as much success, is they're trying to do things that maybe they're just not suited for. It just is the thing. So again, finding your place in the world and your place in this career, I think, is going to give you a lot of value of what you're doing and bring a lot of joy in your life.
Awesome, man. Thank you so much for your time today. This has been extraordinarily educational and raw and real. And I thank you very much.
Thanks, Rob. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for having me. And yeah, we'll talk next time.
Absolutely, brother. Be well.
You too.